Welcome everybody to another developer interview here on Game Wisdom for our Perceptive podcast series. I am Josh Blaser, and joining me is indie developer who is currently working on the shmup Attack of the Karens. We tried this one out, I want to say a pretty long time ago, I think at least over a year, and definitely looking forward to see how the game is going to turn out. And he is on tonight to talk a little bit more about that and development of it. So please welcome from Studio Primitive, Joel Potter. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Doing well, thanks.
And thank you again for reaching out and asking about getting or coming on for one of these podcasts. I'm always happy to have new developers on. And for anyone watching, if you have an upcoming game and want to talk game dev with me, please reach out. All the DMs and such are open. But I hope you are having a great day. I hope you are beating the heat better than I am right now.
So it's pretty hot. I'm in Utah, so we're about 95 right now. But thankfully, my air conditioning is doing okay.
Yeah, sadly, mine is not. And for people listening to us, there's a good chance you may hear like the turbine of my fan over my head because I had to raise it up just so I don't melt on stream while I'm doing these discussions. But again, it is great to have you on, and we certainly have a lot to talk about in terms of shmupping and so on. And for anyone tuning in live, or if you're watching this recorded, if you have any questions for Joel, be sure to leave them in the comments. So, to get the ball rolling, since it's your first time on for one of these discussions, could you talk a little bit about who you are, what is your game dev background, and for people watching, what is kind of like the pitch for Attack of the Karens?
Okay, so yeah, I'm Joel Potter. My game dev background is pretty brief. I have been developing this game for the past about 2 years or so. Before that, I did a couple of small projects that I put out on itch. But really, this is my first commercial effort into making a game. So, a couple of years doing this. I am an engineer by trade and by school, so I got a little bit of programming knowledge doing that. And so the transition to game dev from engineering was a little bit, a little bit of a learning experience. There's the artistic side, which I didn't have too much of, that I kind of had to learn. The marketing side, which is still brand new to me too, so learning that. And then I guess the pitch for Attack of the Karens would be it's a very crazy, rambunctious, humorous shoot 'em up that has some roguelite, rogue elements to it. And it's one of those games where you just got to have one more run all the time so you can keep progressing and keep trying to make it through. So,
Mm-hmm. So you said that you started this about 2 years ago, as we're recording this now. So what kind of gave birth to the original concept, the original idea for
so it was originally conceived actually by a Twitter poll, oddly enough. So I just finished up a couple of small projects, and I was deciding what I wanted to do next. And I had about a couple of hundred followers on Twitter back then, so I made a poll. I said, "What would you like me to make? Would you like me to make a carrying slapping simulator? Would you like me to make a Game Boy style shoot 'em up?" And then I had another option. I don't remember what that was, but the votes were even between a Game Boy style shoot 'em up and a Karen slapping simulator. So I said, well, I'm going to put those together. I want to make a Karen shoot 'em up. So that's where the idea came from. It was originally intended to be a much smaller project, like a couple of months, but people liked the idea. I got good reaction, and so it expanded into a larger scope.
it? All right. And in terms of what engine are you using for Karen?
Unity.
All right. How are you finding? Again, you said you had kind of like a software engineer background. How was like using or learning Unity for you?
So I wasn't a software engineer. I was actually a mechanical
Okay.
engineer. So we did a little bit of robotics programming is all that I really knew. So learning Unity for me, there was a big learning curve to get used to that. I hadn't really done any kind of other engines or anything like that before. The only experience I had had in a game development engine was I used RPG Maker XP back in like 2005, 2006 to try and make my own little RPG game. That's as far as I'd ever gotten. And then I had the small projects that I'd done before I started Attack of the Karens. And so really getting into Unity on a larger scale, on a bigger scope, I had to take some tutorials. There was a lot of really good tutorials from Unity itself, Unity Learn. They have a great course called what is it? Create with Code was the course that I took from start to finish. And that really gets you some really good solid footing on how to code, on object-oriented programming, on using prefabs and different assets, and really get you introduced to the concept of game making. You actually make like 3 or 4 games, I think, as part of that course. So it's put on by Unity, so all the knowledge is there, and it's the right way to learn. So that's how I did it, and it was really good.
Hmm. And with like building Attack of the Karens, have you worked with or like dabbled with like shmup design before?
No, actually, this is my first shoot 'em up. So yeah, it's been fun.
Hmm. You are talking to someone who's played quite a bit of shoot 'em ups, although like bullet hell like Tuhu level is kind of like my limit because I know there's people who will play like that level of a shmup, and that gets very extreme. And I know from playing the original demo or the demo you had up on Steam that you're certainly not going that far into bullet hell. So
No, no.
so for the people who are tuning in live or recorded, kind of like if you wouldn't mind to go over like what is like the kind of the basic gameplay of Attack of the Karens.
So it's a smaller scope, right? It's a smaller game. There's 4 bosses, with one final boss at the end once you reach it. And the game kind of resets itself every time you run. So you'll start off with no upgrades, just a stock ship. You just have a set amount of health, and then you try your best to get as far as you can in the level. And throughout the level, as you kill bigger enemies or if you kill a boss, you'll get things called modules. They look like little microchips. And so as you collect these modules, you can spend those in an upgrade shop in between the runs to strengthen your ship. So you can get better fire rate, you can get more damage, you can get more ship health, those kinds of things. You can also upgrade to get some different abilities. Like there's one ability that deflects enemy bullets and actually shoots them back at the enemies. There's an upgrade that allows you to launch rockets from the ship, and then an orbiting kind of ball around your ship that will absorb bullets. So some of those are pretty familiar shmup mechanics that you've seen maybe in some other games. But yeah, so that's the basic premise. Is you're doing run after run to try and build your ship up, and then eventually you'll make your way through all 4 Karens, and then you'll fight the final boss at the end. And really, the draw of the game is the boss fights. So the boss fights is where all the fun, where all the action happens. There's several phases to each boss. There's 3 phases for each of them, and each of those has kind of a scaling difficulty
Hmm.
that it'll start out. If you run into a boss on the first level, it'll be rather easy. But if you run into that same boss on the last level, that boss will be a lot more difficult. One other feature to the game is the levels are randomized and the boss orders are randomized too. So every run's going to be completely unique.
And I'm glad you mentioned because I was about to ask you about like kind of like the procedural nature of Karen. And
Yeah.
as another question for you, as an indie developer, is this your first time dabbling with like Proc Gen, or have you used that on some of your other projects?
This would be the first time doing it, and again, it's been a learning experience. But the way I've approached it is just designing chunks of the game. I don't know that it's true procedurally generated. It's more kind of put chunks of areas.
Hmm.
For example, there's one area where you can break open a windshield and you go inside of a big giant ship, and part of the level is the inside of that ship, and there's different traps and lasers and enemies that you can encounter inside that ship. And that ship, I designed it in different chunks. So there's probably about a pool of 12 different chunks that the algorithm will pull from and spit out, 3 of those. Then the next time you encounter that ship, it'll be 3 different interior rooms that are kind of organized inside of that. And so that's the way I've approached it. I've seen that approach in some other games, but I don't know that I'd call that true procedural generation. It's more kind of a randomized
Yeah,
areas.
randomized. Okay. In terms of like building the difficulty of the game out, as you said, like it's kind of a roguelite in terms of progression, getting more things, becoming more powerful. How are you
Mhm.
approaching kind of the overall difficulty of the game? Not just from like a roguelite perspective, but also from like a bullet hell shmup aspect as well.
Um, so a lot of it that's actually been a big portion of what I spent my time on developing the game is making sure that that curve is balanced and feels right. So I wanted it to not have so much friction when a new player comes in that they just give up, right? I wanted them to feel some success and enough to get to the first boss and feel like they're making progress, and then they spend some more time grinding, and then they feel they make a little bit more progress, and so that difficulty curve has to be designed that way to let the player know, hey, you're doing better, and not just be a hard wall. And so the way that I've approached that in Attack of the Karens is I think I mentioned before that each level gets progressively more difficult, even though they're randomized. The enemies and the bosses are programmed to have scaling difficulty of attacks depending on when you encounter them. So I use things like bullet speed of the enemy projectiles, how many bullets there are appearing from enemies. Those kinds of things will scale as you get later in the game. So one of the bosses is, I'm going to use an example, is Tiffany. So Tiffany is, she's the corporate Karen. So she's all about stocks and business success and all that kind of stuff. And so one of her attacks is she launches a huge missile that explodes into a bunch of dollar signs and yen signs, euro signs, all that stuff. And those will damage you. And in level one, there's only maybe about 20 of those that explode out in a circular fashion.
Mm-hmm.
But if you approach her on level four, it becomes almost 60 bullets, right, that come out of that explosion. So that's an example of how the attacks will scale. And so every attack that the bosses have, almost every single one of them does that, where it scales from a really easy at level one all the way to really hard at level four. So
Mm-hmm. In terms of like the bullet hell design, again, like bullet hell can mean very different things depending upon the audience and the level of skill you're kind of focusing on. How was it kind of designing like the bullet hell patterns and just like the overall difficulty from that standpoint?
so I wanted it to be not predictable. So it's a true challenge every time you're playing it. There are some bullet patterns that are rote memorization, but I didn't want it to be a traditional shmup where you could memorize it from start to finish
Mm-hmm.
and be able to dodge the whole bullet pattern all the way through. I wanted it to be a true roguelite where every time you play it, it feels like you have to be on your toes. You don't really know what to expect. So the bullet patterns, a lot of them have RNG involved where the position of the bullets, where they're coming from, some of the speed variation and all that, even within those difficulty scales that I mentioned before, there's still a little bit of variation inside each of those to kind of control where the bullets are coming from, how fast they are, those kinds of things. So, and I also wanted to include not just bullet attacks, but there's also some attacks that are just straight up like kind of maybe a little bit different mechanics that you haven't seen in a shmup before. Like there's one example on the final boss, you have to shoot an orb into the boss to knock out its shield, and you have to do that 3 times. Then you enter in a damage phase. And there's a boss earlier on where you have to knock out 2 shield orbs before you can damage the boss and it drops its shield. So, and those shields, if you don't knock them out before that, those shields will reflect your bullets back at you. So kind of a little bit of I that probably exists somewhere in a shmup somewhere, but I wanted to kind of throw in some different mechanics that were a little bit not expected, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like the difference we see between like the two who or like very high level bullet hell and someone I play from a lot of indie developers where like two who it comes down to like very specific pattern memorization, like very pixel precise. If you're not like this exact pixel on the screen, you're going to be dead. And then there are a lot of indie games I know. I've played quite a few like shmup roguelikes or even just more like non-traditional shmups that go for like a more of a random pattern to their bosses. And I always find it to be a lot more interesting, at least coming from having more of an action game background rather than a shmup background.
Yeah, yeah. One of the games I really drew from a lot was I don't know if you've ever played Black Paradox before.
No.
Um, That was a roguelite shmup that I really got into on Nintendo Switch, and a lot of the design for Attack of the Karens draws a lot of inspiration from that game. It wasn't a hugely successful or well-known shmup, but that one really just caught me and grabbed my attention a lot. And I poured hours into that one. And that and Steriden was another one that really kind of piqued my interest when I was developing the game. So there's a lot of influence from those two games in this. Kind of, yeah, again, more kind of the roguelite, rogue type shmups rather than traditional shmups. So,
One that I like that I don't know if we would classify as a roguelike, at least I mean in some respect, was Jets and Guns. This is like a long time ago. They did a sequel, I think like 3, 4 years ago,
mhm.
and that was one that I enjoyed. And I also want to thank you. You actually brought up a game that I never even heard of with Black Paradox. You actually managed to stump me in terms of my encyclopedia of the games play. But I've added that to my wish list. That is also almost like an infinite amount at this point as well.
Yeah, that's definitely what you should try. It's high quality, and so I like I said, I put hours into it, and that's one I go back to every now and then. So that's pretty rare for me. I don't have much time to go back to games, so if I can go back to a game after trying it first, then that's good.
hmm I guess I'll share a recommendation for you. I really enjoyed Monolith, which is like kind of like a Binding of Isaac meets shmup almost. Like it's top down. You're exploring. They may be doing a name change. I heard. I'm not quite sure that is still going in, but yeah, it can still be found under Monolith. They're probably changing because like there's like 15 different games called Monolith on Steam, all from completely different designs.
Yeah, and another one that, sorry, we're talking shmups here for a second, but another one that you're probably familiar with was Zero Ranger. That's a big one that I loved. I played through that a few times, and I'm sure you've noticed, Attack of the Karens has a dual color palette, right? And so
hmm
that draws a lot of inspiration from what Zero Ranger did and what they were able to accomplish with such a limited palette on their game. So that was kind of an inspiration for me as well.
hmm Yeah, Zero Ranger is one of my favorites as well. And it is interesting how we're seeing more like I guess like more indie games doing like a shmup, but again avoiding that kind of high level of difficulty. Like one that like I remember playing this and I'm surprised how much backlash like people just did not like it was Sign Moria. This was I think like 10, 12 years ago, probably even more than that. This one I'm like really dating that, but I remember trying that one out and just could not get into it. And then when I look online, like all like the shmup fans like, no, we hate that one. I'm like, oh, well, okay then. I did try. They put out a few like the Two Who games from. Oh man, that the famous Japanese developer. I think it was Treasure or could be another studio that did like the Ultra Two Who levels, like back in like the '90s. I'll see if I can find a few on my list here while I'm trying to talk about it. But like that level, I think it kind of goes with like my own style of playing games. That I typically find games that are all about like 100% min max perfection. I just get a little bit bored of them after a while. I think like as you brought up Zero Ranger, like my favorite thing about Zero Ranger, besides just like the theme, was that final boss. The fact that it was a random pattern fight. And again, like you really don't see, I think, a lot of shmups do that kind of design.
Yeah, yeah, and for me, Zero Ranger, like I wouldn't call myself an avid shmupper by any way. I know it sounds weird because I'm making a shmup, but for me, Zero Ranger is just the right amount of challenge that I want to be at to where it takes me several runs to get it. It's still frustrating. You still have that, angst when you die and you want to try it again, but it's not such a hard wall that you can't do it and you give up. That's what I didn't want for Attack of the Karens. So,
hmm And a lot of that can also be helped by not having or by the roguelike elements that you can add more to it. And you mentioned a few minutes ago about trying to get that balance right between the shmup difficulty and giving the player kind of like that persistent element to it. What was that like in terms of like balancing and fine tuning the game?
really, it came down to the power of the upgrades. So, in the game itself, you can level up, right? So you can, if you reach a full bar of experience, there's an orb that will pop into the game, and it cycles through 3 random upgrades, and that ranges anything from an additional health point to you can drop grenades now with your ship to different drones that will follow you. For example, one drone will be kind of a resurrect, right? If you run out of health, then the drone will come in and resurrect you with 1 health. And those upgrades can be leveled up as you get more levels. So that drone that resurrects you can be leveled up to now resurrect you with 2 health. So that's just an example. And so there's a lot of that thrown in there as well. And the balance came in with tuning those upgrades to make sure they weren't giving the player too much of an advantage, but that it was offering some strategy. So now, in addition to the meta upgrades that you can purchase with the modules, you have this in-game system that you have to strategize, what path, what builds you're going to take to be able to give yourself most of the advantage. And so that comes through experience as well, but it also is designed to not give the player such a big advantage that they're just breezing through the whole game. That was kind of a challenge at the first. I think actually it was you that made the comment when you played it last year that
Mhm.
it was a little bit easy to get through if you hit the right chain of upgrades. You could just breeze through the
Mhm.
whole demo. And so I took that feedback and I said, well, let's tune this a little bit to make it to where it feels like you're getting stronger, but it's not that you're completely overpowered and you can just steamroll the whole game. So
Mhm. And that's always like one of like the tougher natures of roguelite design, is that they tend to reach that point where you just get just enough upgrades that the entire game just it's over at that point. Like when you hit that right threshold of damage or get just enough health points, nothing else in the game can really challenge you.
yeah, yeah. And one thing that's going to be an Attack of the Karens when it's released is an additional difficulty mode. So that difficulty mode will carry on. As you might not be able to even touch it when you haven't even upgraded your ship at all. But as you continue to upgrade your ship, that'll become kind of an additional challenge. Maybe once you're fully upgraded, you can now take on the hard mode or the insane mode and see if you can beat it that way. So
Hmm. And just for the chat, I was talking about recommendations. The one that I was thinking of earlier was from Cave Interactive, like their whole line. So Dodonpachi, like that's that level of bull hell that's like a little
yeah,
beyond what I can do. Like I can handle like Zero Ranger, Monolith, that kind of thing, but when it's just basically entire screen of death, like that's when I just can't dodge those.
yeah. I've had some schmuppers play the game that compare it to Dodonpachi. That's just they're like, I breezed through this. I'm like, well, sorry. That's you're way more experienced than I planned for.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So,
as another recommendation, I think another really solid one. If you haven't heard of it, of the A Void Reigns Upon Her Heart. It's a like the name is very poetry inspired there, but it's very much a shmup roguelike, and that is just more roguelike. Like, there is no carryover in terms of unlocks, but you unlock new stuff that can appear in each subsequent run.
I'm writing that down. Avoid rains upon her heart. That sounds
Yeah,
like a cool one.
it has been in early access for it feels like so long now, but they just keep adding more and more to it.
Hmm.
And yeah, again, like for people watching, like I can spout roguelike roguelike games until the cows come home. I guess as another point I want to talk to you about in terms of the persistent aspects. How are you like approaching like what you want to tweak and how much? And the reason I am bringing this up is I'm thinking of games like Hades, where Hades, of course, has or it had its whole kind of unlock and progression system, but there were inherently fixed limits. Like you couldn't just give yourself 27 dashes and 20 and 50 extra lives in that one.
Well, really, a lot of those decisions come through feedback from people playing the game and deciding, hey, this is a little bit too much, or we need enough. We don't have enough here. I've been fortunate to have a few good dedicated testers. I mean, being a small dev, it's hard to have a big testing pool, especially where this is my first game. But I've been fortunate enough to have a few dedicated people that will continuously try new builds, and they'll give me the feedback of, hey, this is just way too easy for me with this upgrade all the way. And so I go, okay, that's going to be a nerf in the next patch. Or they'll say something like, this needs a bit of a buff. I don't even find myself going to this upgrade. One example was there was in a previous build of the game, you could unlock an ability that left a mine whenever you got damaged. And it was very underwhelming. Nobody used it, partly because number one, you're trying to avoid damage in a shmup. That's one thing you don't want to do. So why would you get an ability that reacts to damage that way? And number two is it never really sought out or damaged any enemies. And so I said, well, let's do away with that and instead let's have the upgrade launch a homing grenade every 10 shots or every 15 shots. So all of a sudden now, people are going to that. And so that also gives me a tool to use for a different build path. So now people have to choose, do I want this offensive upgrade or do I want something that's more defensive? And so really, again, to bring it back to your question, the balance of where to limit those things came through feedback from the testing community. So
Hmm. And with the kind of like overall difficulty of the game, as you said, like you've had people who've played like 2 levels of bullet hell, finding it obviously too easy at that state. But I guess like as we were talking about the comparisons with like Zero Ranger and some of the other games, I guess how are you or how did you approach trying to get that balance right? Whether like making things easier or harder or changing things around.
um well, yeah, I think it really just comes again back to testing. I think I rely a lot on the feedback of my community to tell me if the game is balanced right or not. Because I've played it so much as a developer that I can breeze through a lot of it, right? So I know where all the paths are. Even though it's random, it still kind of trips me up a little bit. But it's hard for me to get a sense of if it's balanced or not because I'm so ingrained in it that really I have to rely on the feedback of my testers. And so the way I've tuned that is if they find that a boss fight is lacking, there was a couple of phases that were kind of boring to some people and some bosses. So I go back to those phases and I say, well, what can I do to make this more challenging, more exciting? Can I add more attacks? Can I add surprises in some way that they're not expecting that's going to throw them off, right? And so that's what I've looked for is where are the dead spots in the game and what can I do to throw into those dead spots to kind of make it more interesting and more challenging.
Hmm. And with the kind of like development of the game, again being in development for about 2 years now, a little over that, what has been I guess like has the game like shifted like from like the basic structure at all from the original concept, or has it kept relatively consistent?
It's been relatively consistent. In fact, it's probably shrunk in scope. So a lot of the work came in creating the content, creating the
Hmm.
art, creating, the structure of the programming and everything, especially since I was so new. I learned a lot of it on the fly. A lot of programming techniques and a lot of pixel art techniques came just from doing this game. And so originally the scope was, 6 bosses, and it was a lot more cutscenes, a lot more levels, a lot more weapons, and it kind of killed me to have to bring the scope down. But I told myself, if I want to release the game, at some point I've gotta limit myself. Otherwise, I'll just keep going and going. And I want to move on to other projects. Attack of the Karens is not the end of what I want to do. It's a stepping stone, definitely. It's one that I want to polish, and I want to get a good name out there. But it's not the only game I want to make. And so I wanted to finish this well. I wanted to keep it containable, and but I also wanted to move on to something that was different. So
Hmm. And how was it learning pixel art? Did you do like all the art and music for the game yourself, or are there other people on the team?
it's just me. So I did all the art, I did all the music, and I did all the programming and sound. The only help that I really had was I hired a couple of actors for the voice acting. So there's two characters two people that I hired. One was the voice of your ally. Her name's Amanda. She flies with you and kind of guides you throughout the game. And then there's the voice of the 4 different Karens. That was voiced by another person. One person actually did all 4 of those voices, so it's pretty interesting.
How was it learning or making use of pixel art for the game?
So pixel art was a journey for sure. It hits home for me because I grew up in the NES era. That was it's kind of hits nostalgia for me a lot, and so drawing from that, I learned a lot based off of tutorials. I took a couple of Udemy courses to kind of help me to learn how to do it, but really a lot of it just came from trial and error. What looks good, what doesn't look good, and really learning how lighting works. That's kind of really when my pixel art skills kind of grew. Everything looked really flat until I could describe things in volume, right? So a ball, if it doesn't have light on it on a paper, is a circle, but as soon
Hmm.
as it hits you show where the shading is, now it becomes a sphere and it becomes so much deeper. And so learning how to do that in pixel art, once I started to master that, well, I wouldn't say master it all, but once I started to learn how to do that, the designs just kind of started to take off and started to be more interesting. And so that was it was a really fun journey. I really enjoy making pixel art. Yeah, I think it's there to stay for me. So
And a question from Miko again in chat. What site do you use for the voiceover? So I guess maybe for hiring voice actors.
so I found one actor from Fiverr, and actually no, I didn't. I tried some people on Fiverr, and they didn't really work out. They just weren't what I wanted, and so I didn't end up going with anybody on there. I found so the person that voices Amanda, her name's Abby Michaels. I found her on Twitter. I just put out a I actually just started searching Twitter for voice actors, and her name came up, and I listened to her demo reel, and I really liked it. I felt like she'd be a really good fit. So I reached out and I said, are you available? And she said, yeah, I'd love to do this. It sounds like a real interesting project. And she emailed me her rates and everything was good. And so I sent her a script, and the rest was history. She just has done all the lines for me there. And for all the Karens, they're all voiced by a person named Kelsey Mayer. And I actually found Kelsey through a mutual server through, I don't know if you know, Indie Gamiacs. He interviews indie devs and stuff sometimes. He's a friend of mine, and so we connected on that server. Actually, that's how I got to know Kelsey. And so again, I reached out to her. I knew she was really busy. She actually gets a lot of anime roles and gets a lot of success that way. And so I was worried she wasn't going to be available, but she was excited about the project and said, "Yeah, I'd like to do it." So I was really fortunate to get both of them.
And how was it doing the chip tunes for the game as well?
The chip tune, that was probably my favorite part of making the game. So I've got a lot of background in music. I've been doing music ever since probably I was about oh, I, probably 12 or so, 10 to 12 years old. So it's been almost about 25 years or so that I've been in doing music. So I grew up playing in bands and writing music and all that kind of thing. And then so when the opportunity came to make the music for the game, I said, well, I want to do chiptune. That sounds really cool. And so I'd already been dabbling in FL Studio, which is a DAW to kind of make different. It's usually used for for beats, for loops, that kind of thing. And so I downloaded a plugin called Super Audio Cart, and that's what I use to make the chip tune. So it's a very handy, very nice plugin. I paid a little bit of money for it, but I think it was well worth it because it makes the process so much smoother when you're making chip tune.
And yeah, again, as someone else who grew up in the 80s, 90s era games, I so lolly good at chiptune theme for a lot of my games.
Yeah, I definitely again like the pixel art. It hits that nostalgic vibe for me, so I love the chip tune.
Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else in terms of game or the game design I want to bring up. As a quick note for chat and everyone, we're about 33 minutes in. I figure the way we're going, maybe another 15 to 20 minutes, unless we get on a major topic that we just start rambling about. We could ramble about more roguelikes and shmups. That could easily fill another hour.
Yeah, I could talk about roguelites for forever. So
I guess with the kind of I guess I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase this. I guess in terms of the length, you mentioned earlier that you originally had it to 6 and now it's down to 4. In terms of designing the length of the stages themselves, or even just going back to what you were saying earlier, kind of the shuffling of these kinds of chunks of content, what was it like trying to build each stage to have that, it being still controlled, but still having that replayability and that unpredictability to it?
well, I guess I'll kind of start by talking about how I approach designing the levels, right? And so I wanted it to feel like you're in the middle of a city and it's being taken over by these cyborg Karens. So the story is that a pathogen from outer space comes down and invades this day spa when there's four entitled women there, and and infects them, and they mutate into these evil cyborgs, and they go crazy, and they want to take over the city and destroy everything, right? Because they're angry and they're full of entitlement. So the way I approached the level design was I wanted it to feel like you're in the middle of this city and it's being taken over, and there's a sense of urgency of you got to stop these people because they're destroying your neighborhoods, they're destroying your downtown, they're destroying your beach, and all that kind of stuff. And so that's what the levels are. I mean, that there's a downtown level, there's a suburbs level, there's a main street level, there's a downtown. I think I already said that. There's a suburbs. Anyway, there's 6 different levels you can do, and the level design came in of, well, I want the enemies to be themed around that. So the best example of that is the beaches level, right? It's called Bayside, and so in Bayside, you've got these ladies that are in swimsuits with big machine guns on their shoulders that are just spraying bullets all over at you. You've got one lady that's got a big tanning reflector right here under her chin, and she comes at the bottom of the screen and it shoots a giant laser up and covers the whole screen, right? So there's themed enemies like that that pop in and out of the level, and I wanted it to feel like you were at the beach fighting in the beaches. And so every mini boss is also themed according to the stages. So on the Bayside level, you fight a couple of volleyball players that will spike balls and bump balls at you, and they split into tons of bullets, right? And so everything is kind of themed that way. And so breaking that into chunks, the way it's kind of approached programmatically is, again, I kind of took the roguelite approach where there's different events that can spawn from a list. So the code takes a list of pre-programmed spawning events and randomizes those and spits those out in a list. And so you could encounter any one of these enemies in any different progression throughout the whole level. So again, you're throwing random level orders in on top of random enemy progressions on top of random bosses to get kind of a truly random game every time you play. And that became a challenge when you go back to balance all that to make sure everything progresses linearly and you're not hitting any kind of walls along any of those points. So that was a big focus of the game, was going back and making sure it was all balanced, and that it was all tuned right, and it felt like you weren't hitting any walls. And it's still kind of a balancing act, right? I'm not quite done yet, and I imagine after launch there's going to be some post patches that will help balance that as I get more feedback. But that's generally how I've approached the level design.
hmm And as you said, like having it be like random on top of the random on top of that means that it becomes a little bit trickier in terms of how the persistent is going to work on it. I'm not sure if you had a chance to study this or if you like looked into this, but in terms of like the play testers, like how far like are people generally able to get like on like a brand new account or a brand new profile?
Well, the testers that I've got, they've finished the game multiple times. But the majority of people usually they've only really played the demo. So the demo's got one level and then it ends. So it'll be interesting to see a fresh new player that's never touched the game before come in and play it. So it usually takes a fresh person from when they start testing the game about 3 hours or so to get all the way through the end of the game. So
All right. Let's see. I'm trying to think of anything else. I guess for people watching, in terms of like where the game is at right now, do you have any estimates for like release dates or things like that?
yeah, so the release date is going to be on September 25th. That's what I'm shooting for right now as a release date for the game. So things are wrapping up and looking like we're going to hit that date. I'm fixing some final bugs and doing some balancing, but it's looking pretty optimistic that that's when the game's going to be out. So
And of course, for people watching, it's obviously going to be on Steam. Do you have plans for any other platforms?
now just Steam right now. So it'll be open on, well, not just Steam, but just PC. So it'll be available on Steam. I'm also going to put it on Itch, and I've actually got a little community on Game Jolt too that I'll put it out for sale on there. So
All right. And as you said earlier, one of your goals was to kind of bring this game to a conclusion. You don't want this to be like the infinitely developed game. Do you see yourself like adding any new content after launch, or do you feel like 1.0 will be it in terms of the game?
I guess it just depends on the response. So if there's some really enthusiastic people that just really like the game, I would definitely be open to going in and adding some patch content after launch. I've got a couple of ideas that I wanted to include in the game that I just didn't have time to, and I had to cut the scope. So I would like to go back and put some of those in the game, but again, it's got to be worth my time as a dev, right? I gotta know that there's hunger for it, that there's an appetite for it, and that it's not just um, just one person asking for it. So we'll see how it goes.
Let's see. Amico in chat asked, as a solo dev, how did you go about building a community?
That's a challenge. I
That
think it just comes down to. Hang on, I'm gonna get a drink of water real quick.
is all right.
I think it just comes down to my time. Um, if I have more time, I can spend more time cultivating a community. It's been a challenge for me to understand how to do that. Um, but people really get excited around, new content, new builds, new things like that. And so I try to hype that up as much as I can. And I consider my community basically my testers, which is about 5 to 10 people in the Discord, and they really love to talk about different strategies. They like to talk about different things they're doing in the game to progress. And so, um, asking them their feedback on things and asking them what they would like to see next in the game, or what's the frustration points for them in the game. That's been a good builder for community for us. And also, like, just sharing whatever content I can on socials has been great to build a community for the game. And again, I'm new at doing all that, and so community building is something I'm definitely learning, but that seems to have been a good way for me to get people to get excited about the game.
hmm And with like kind of putting the game on Game Jolt and Itch and on Steam, do you see like your community like I guess like split between like the three different platforms, or is it kind of like all like unified around the game?
Well, the hope is that they'll be guided to the Discord server, to my email list, and kind of go there for future updates. I will of course reach out on Itch and on Game Jolt and on Steam to update them about things, but really I'd like to kind of bring the community into one central location, which would preferably be Discord. I think that's probably the best place to foster the community and to chat with people about the game. And to I also like to host live events on the Discord. To when I'm developing, I'll pop on a live stream and people can watch me do pixel art. They can watch me do some coding, that kind of thing, maybe see what it's like behind the scenes of the game. So that's always interesting to do too. So the ultimate goal is, yeah, to sell on those platforms, but to guide people to Discord or to the email list for updates. So
All right. And for chatting, this will be kind of last call for questions, as we'll wrap things up in the next few minutes. But I guess, do you have an idea for what you'll be doing after Karen's wraps up? Like, do you have any other game ideas you're interested in exploring?
yeah, I've got a whole Google Drive full of game dev ideas. So my brain never stops thinking about this kind of stuff. And so this is definitely it's a passion of mine, right? And so I have no shortage of ideas, ranging from new ideas for roguelites to strategy games to city builders to all kinds of things that I would like to dip my toe into and see what I like best. I don't think I'll do another shoot 'em up after this one. I think it was fun. It was a good learning experience, but that's what I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be a way for me to learn how to build a full game, to launch a commercial project, to do bug testing, to do an alpha, beta, to launch a game. And now I want to use the tools that I've learned and really plug them into kind of a more serious, more mature project. And so, yeah, I think my heart is kind of leading me towards something more open world, more crafty, more type of a game like that. So,
Do you see yourself ever making that like two who level bullet hell shmup in the future?
um, maybe if I ever wanted to come back and make a shmup again, I'm in the middle of it right now. I'm about to launch right now, so I'm feeling the burn. I'm feeling the itch to want to move on to a new project, and so maybe ask me in about a year. I'll let you know how I feel then. No.
All right. I guess as another question about you being a solo dev there, in terms of learning all this for the first time, the design, the coding, art, and music, what has been, I guess, like the most challenging, or like for like other like first timers or students watching us right now? What was like the aspect that may have proven to be like the most difficult for you to learn at like when you first started?
Um, I would have to say the marketing was definitely the most difficult for me. Um, I I'm approaching this as building a business, right? Like I want
Mm-hmm.
this to be successful. I want this to be something I can do
Yeah.
to sustain myself someday. And I approached it with this game from the beginning completely wrong. So as I've developed this game, I've learned a lot about how to approach marketing analysis and upfront research on doing those kinds of things. And that to me has been the biggest challenge of this game is getting people to look at it. It's been very hard. I think it's because a lot of people when they see the game, they think one of two things. They either think this is hilarious, I got to try this, or it's a joke, I'm not going to waste my time. And so having a game based around a meme that I'm putting a lot of time and polish into was kind of a mistake, right? Because people think it's a joke and they don't want to give us a serious shot, even though it is a really fun, addicting roguelite when you get into it. People approach this thinking, "What the heck is this?" And so
Mm-hmm.
that for me has been the biggest challenge is the disappointment of having this polished gem that I just want to show people, and then people just kind of turn their nose up at it. So
Yeah, and that is not the first time I've heard that. I know with the my friendly neighborhood, the one the kind of indie horror game that's kind of like all like Sesame Street Muppet style. That I can tell that a lot of people look at that game as just being like another like FNAF clone or that kind of thing. And I know there's a developer working on the game Winnie's Hole, based off of Winnie the Pooh as a virus mutating creature that's like roaming the land, killing everything. And people are like, "Why the hell did you choose that?" And they just said, it went, it went into the public domain. So there we go. There's our game idea."
yeah, that's I've kind of experienced a similar thing. I was on a Japanese showcase for the game. I don't remember the name of the festival that I was in. I want to say it was I can't remember, and I'm gonna fail. But when the reviewers brought the video on, it was all live, and so they had a live stream of all these different trailers and everything that was going throughout the whole event. And so when they brought the video of my game, the clip of my game that I submitted on the live stream, you saw both reactions right there. The one guy started laughing his head off and said, "That's hilarious." And the person next to him, she just kind of looked at it and goes, "Hmm, and that was about all I got. So those two reactions right there perfectly sum up kind of, the community's reaction at the game. So then there's the people that get into it and try it and love it. So I guess there's three kinds of people that have touched my game. But
Let's see. Amiko asked in chat a few minutes ago, "Do you get or make Harry Potter jokes?" I'm not sure. There's like a greater meme there or something else.
yeah, I get Harry Potter jokes all the time. I don't have any good ones though. I need to look. Oh, my son has a good one. Um, what is Harry Potter's favorite way to get down a hill?
Hmm.
Walking J.K. Rowling.
Oh, jeez.
So yeah, that's what he uses in school all the time. But that's the only Harry Potter joke that I've got.
All right. Well, I think I am about out of questions. Anything else regarding the development of Karens? Again, from a design standpoint, production, whatever, that we didn't touch on that you would like to bring up?
Um, no, I will just say that I approached the whole thing with a real big sense of humor, right? I wanted it to be fun. I wanted the animations to be kind of larger than life, to be very, very entertaining, very colorful, very comic. And so a lot of that energy, a lot of that kind of larger than life comic book type feel is injected into the game. And so I hope it comes across as that way, as having a very kind of cartoony comic feel to it, and I've had so much fun making the game and coming up with different ideas for attacks and coming up with different things, levels, that kind of stuff for the game. And so a lot of my humor is put into this game, and I hope people really enjoy it. So
All right. And I guess before we kind of go into our final wrap up for the chat, do you have anything you'd like to say to the fans watching? Any final notes or things to take us out on?
no, just thank you very much for having me on your cast. It's been great to sit down with you, and I'll just plug the game really quick if that's all right. Go and wishlist it on Steam, Attack of the Karens, and if you like what you see, join us in the Discord. We'd love to have you.
And I'll be looking forward to checking out when it's released next month as well.
Yep, September 25th. It's going to be awesome.
All right. So, with that, Joel, I think we'll wrap things up for tonight. If you are free, after the game is launched, or if you want to talk about whatever your next project may be, definitely reach out. I'll be happy to have you back on. We can chat more about it and all our favorite roguelikes.
Yeah, I would love to be back. This is great. Thanks.
All right. You mentioned, of course, your Discord. In terms of, I'll include links to your Twitter, to the store page and stuff down below. Anything else you want to mention social media wise about people can find you or the game or things like that?
Pretty much just Twitter and Discord. That's where I hang out. I'm also on TikTok, Studio Primitive, so you can follow me there. That's something I'm trying to build and reach out to people that way. But yeah, TikTok, Twitter, or Discord. That's where I hang out.
All right. And for people watching the recorded version, I'll include links to all those in the notes down below. So, with that, Joel, I think I will let you go for tonight. It has been a pleasure, and I do wish you the best of luck with the release next month.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so for everyone watching this live, we're going to end things here for tonight. I will have my regular game stream starting up in probably the next 20 minutes or so. Again, if you are a developer working on a game or want to come on and talk about game dev, I'm always looking for a guest. Reach out, any which way. Again, you can find me on all the stuff that's up there. Check out our Discord, Patreon, all my books and marketing plugs like that as well. And again, Joel, thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, everyone. With that said, have a great night. I will see anyone still sticking around for the game stream later, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where you some of the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.